Welcome to another episode of the Anabolic Enquiry with Mr. Connor Walsh. And today is going to be an exciting one. Today we delve into the world, the lesser known world of peptides. Peptides that will help you as a performance athlete or just as a human. Connor, talk to us about peptides. What are they? Obviously, there's a whole bunch of classes. Maybe talk to us about some of the different classes, and then we'll go through and talk about the specific peptides themselves.
Yeah, okay. So peptides are hormones that are made from amino acid structures. So typically you have two main types of hormones. You've got lipid and protein-based hormones. Peptides are the kind that are made from a protein structure as opposed to the lipid. You've got lots and lots of different types of peptides, massive varying different sizes of the peptides. You starting with your oligopeptides, which are your really small ones, and then going all the way up to like your growth hormones, which are say 191 amino acids long in length. Um, Massive ranges of different functions. Different peptide hormones can have completely different actions in different parts of the body. So yeah, it's a very, very broad class.
Now, one thing that I was thinking about the other day actually was with peptides, if you've been in the industry long enough, you've had like we all know androgenic steroids, right? Like we all know like AASs and we all hear about those all the time. But there's lots of peripheral stuff that comes up and lots of peripheral categories that come up. So can you just distinguish between probably three that get confused: pro hormones, SARMs, and peptides? Just very
Okay. All right. So pro hormones, which in itself gets confused because a lot of the pro hormones were never actually pro hormones. They were designer steroids, which were just effectively forgotten about and not kind of criminalized yet. So they were just brought back out. The true pro hormones were very similar to, I don't know if people probably remember like chronic, which is just a very small structural change to
I'm
the
just
original
laughing because I had a
drug.
very bad experience when I was very young on chronic.
I'm sure plenty of people did, yeah. Um, but yeah, it's the same kind of concept. It's just one very small structural change which stops the drug actually being an active drug in its sold form. And then once the drug is consumed and metabolized, reactions inside the body occur, which then turn that drug into an active drug. So they're pro hormones. They're turning from a non-active hormone into now an anabolic hormone once they're digested in the body. Then you've got a different class altogether, which is SARMs or selective androgen receptor modulators. These are drugs that, to varying degrees, and realistically, probably not to the type of degree that we were hoping for when used in performance enhancing doses, have selectivity in which androgen receptors they impact. So in an ideal world, the SARMs are only going to be going after, say, muscle tissue, bone tissue, stuff of that we're actually wanting to get from those androgens and not having impacts on stuff like your prostate hair, etc. But as I said, in kind of practice, and especially the doses that are used for performance enhancing, once you're super physiological, this doesn't really seem to be the case.
We've obviously just gone through what peptides are. I just think people always go like, so there's steroids, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Do you know what I mean? They kind of lump everything together. They don't understand. They see names or codes, and it just kind of all starts to be the same thing. But they're three very, very different things. Plus, in the next podcast, we'll talk about a whole bunch of other things that performance athletes might consider from terms of supplementation or performance enhancement that don't really fit into these categories either. So there's a whole bunch of different categories that you can look at, but knowing sort of which ones are which and what's going to be the most beneficial, obviously important. But what we're actually talking about here is peptides. Key families for peptides. We're sort of going to go over probably four or five key families today, maybe actually six, I believe.
Yep. So you'd have kind of we'll start with your two almost like parent hormones, I guess. Well, not really, but insulin would be probably the most commonly used peptide worldwide. I'd be very surprised if it's not.
Especially now.
Obviously, yeah, definitely. Obviously, it saves lives. Without insulin, there would be a good portion of the population that would be dead at a very young age. Um, Growth hormone being the second one, which a lot of these peptides are also based off either growth hormone directly or increasing growth hormone in some form or another. Um, so they're kind of obviously active hormones as it is. Then kind of your next main category is going to be your growth hormone peptides, which is also split up into two main categories. Within the growth hormone peptides, you have growth hormone releasing hormones, which are a subset of peptides which tell the pituitary gland to produce more growth hormone. And then you have growth hormone releasing peptides, which tell the pituitary to dump the growth hormone that it's made, which is typically why you want to stack one with the other because you get a synergistic effect. Um, the next kind of class probably to look at from there would be your directly IGF-1 related peptides. So growth hormone has the majority of its anabolic impact via telling the liver to increase IGF and other growth factor production. You can kind of skip this process, I guess, the step in the IGF chain by going directly to IGF and IGF variants, and then other growth factors such as like Meccano growth factor. Um, the next class is probably going to be more of your regenerative and healing based peptides. There are quite a range of different functions within this class, and there are some different options. Kind of your main standouts here would be like your BPC 157, TB 500, GHKCU. You have another class which is going to be kind of like your nootropic and cognitive enhancing peptides. So some things like cerebrolisin, Samax, Salank, stuff of that nature. And then probably just some of your immunosupportive peptides we'll touch on today as well. So thymosin alpha 1, thymolin, epithalon, stuff like that.
I think let's start with let's just I think the best place to start is maybe those parent peptides or parent hormones, the parent peptides, sorry, the insulin and the HGH, because I mean everything's going to sort of flow down from that. So let's talk about insulin. So obviously insulin is a widely used peptide, maybe like you said, maybe the most widely for diabetics and stuff like that. So huge medical use from a performance enhancement standpoint, largely used in bodybuilding, but also surprisingly largely used in strength sports. But I think that people don't understand that, especially overseas, maybe less so in Australia, but overseas, very, very largely utilized in strength sports as well as things like bodybuilding. Can you talk to us about insulin from a the stand, or give us a little bit of information about insulin, like background, but talk to us about insulin from a background of strength performance versus bodybuilding performance, but maybe, and talk about the different lengths of insulin and how we might implement those within our training.
All right. Obviously, I just want to preface with insulins to, make everyone aware that it is one that is potentially lethal if used incorrectly. Realistically, I don't want to be too abrupt with this, but like you do have to be sort of silly to have an issue with the insulin. It is a definite risk, but if you have jumped into insulin without having enough forefront to know what you're doing, then you have no business using it in the first place. It is relatively simple nutritional principles that are required to cover the insulin. It's not rocket science. It's not something that realistically you need to be super scared of. You need to approach it with respect, but it's
Respect.
certainly not, yeah, respect for sure. Now that we've got the disclaimer out the way,
Just the actual disclaimer is all this is just postulation and probably for
exactly, you shouldn't do
conversation's
anything.
sake. If you want insulin, you should be going to see a doctor and you should have diabetes or something along the lines that you actually need insulin for. But if you
Exactly.
were looking to enhance your performance in a sport, talk to us about insulin, what it could do for athletes.
All right. So insulin's one that I see two camps on. Look, I do personally quite like insulin, but I do think there is an overuse of insulin as well. I think a lot of people look to insulin too early on in the career, and I think especially in Australia, it's quite common because it's one of the cheaper performance enhancing drugs, or especially in the past when things were less accessible. I tend to notice a lot more people going to insulin just purely out of a cost point of view. Um, Insulin's one that I think really for most people kind of shines when you're getting larger and more advanced as an athlete. Food intakes are starting to get higher. Blood glucose management might start to get a little bit more poor. There are acute and other benefits to insulin aside from just kind of controlling blood glucose when food gets high. Insulin does have some interactions with cortisol. It's kind of almost a opposite hormone to cortisol in the way that it acts with blood glucose levels. It can sort of modulate cortisol to some degree, which helps lower protein breakdown, allowing for more kind of amino acids in that amino acid pool to go towards, protein synthesis. So there is a little bit of an anabolic effect that way, or kind of through the anti-catabolic effects of modulating the cortisol. Um, Obviously, with glycogen storage being quite big for recovery and strength performance, obviously insulin's going to drive up glycogen storage and nutrient partitioning. Um, there are obviously, there'd be 30, 40, 50. I wouldn't even be able to tell you how many different forms of insulin there are. So you've got a bunch of different time variations, and even insulins that have multiple different peaking onsets.
I think for like let's say for podcasts sake or like for a user's sake, you're probably going to in Australia look at something like Nova Rapid, like probably Human 8 G, is it, or H? Human R.
Humulin R, probably, yep.
Human R would be like medium, and then probably long would be Lantus if you're looking in Australia at
Yeah,
for a performance standpoint using some like the three probably most readily available sort of like insulins, right?
yeah. So I don't see a whole lot of regular insulin available in Australia. I've never really had any clients use regular.
Yeah.
And I think if you have access to a rapid and a slow, that's probably all 99% of people will ever need.
Yeah.
So typically in most countries, but within Australia especially, our main rapid form that you'll get is insulin aspart, which generally you'll see coming as Nova Rapid pens. And then the main form of slow, and now there are actually some differences in the preparations here, which change the pharmacokinetics and dynamics of the drug. But insulin glargine is the most common slow form of insulin you'll get in Australia, otherwise referred to as Lantus. But there are actually newer formulations of insulin glargine now, such as Toujeo, which come at a higher concentration per mil. So there is more units of insulin per milliliter, which actually slows the absorption time further over your standard insulin glargine. So it's the same drug, but in a different preparation. And with this different preparation of Toujeo, it actually lengthens the half-life out even further and gives you slightly more stable blood levels than the same insulin glargine at a lower concentration. So there is a little bit of nuance within the way things are prepared as well. It's not necessarily just this is the drug, this is what it does.
Yeah.
There's some slight differences there. Not major. Like most people could use Toujeo and a standard Lantus preparation almost interchangeably, but there are some subtle differences.
For a performance athlete or for in general, if someone's watching this, what are the key reasons why someone would use either a slow or a long base insulin, sorry, or faster base insulin, or so why, sorry, I'll back up. What are the benefits or the cons to using a fast insulin and when would you use it and versus like a Lantus or a slow insulin?
They both have their own uses, and often I
Use
will use them in
together.
combination.
Yeah.
So typically with Lantus, I'm bringing that in as a blood glucose management thing. So Atlantis is it's not always, but in my guys that are starting to get into that realm of food getting kind of high, maybe blood glucose is starting to become a little bit of an
Specifically
issue managing.
carbohydrates, would you say?
Yeah,
Like guys are taking in 600 to 1,000 grams of carbohydrates a day from a performance standpoint, then obviously put some pressure on the body to try and manage that amount of glucose in the system, right? Which is why you're introducing something like Alantis, just to help people understand why we are using insulin, right? It's a direct
yeah,
correlate to an increase in food or increase in carbohydrate intake, putting pressure on some of the organs that are going to have to deal with that and trying to make sure that your body's functioning properly.
yeah. Yeah, so the slow stuff I'm usually bringing in to deal with that kind of chronic baseline elevation of blood glucose from just the sheer volume of large food. Occasionally, it can be brought in as like a band-aid in situations where Maybe an athlete has some poor insulin sensitivity, but that's not an ideal scenario. Though, if you're 4 weeks out from a comp and you just got to kind of patch it through, it can be used.
Yep.
Um, Typically with your slow stuff, I'm starting out at kind of 10-ish units a day. For most clients, it's going to end up somewhere in that 15 to 25-ish units a day. Typically, I'm splitting that AM and PM. Usually the first portion of the dose will be AM, maybe the first 10 or 15 units. And then if there's more required, some of that will probably get moved to a PM dose. Um, I've had certain clients who you add insulin in and it is absolutely game changing. There's one client I have over in Queensland who is a bit of a hard gainer. Food has to get very high for someone who's only in the low hundreds. Like he's pretty weight stable at about 6,000 calories.
Well,
Um,
yeah, so
yeah, for like a 103 kilo guy. We put kind of 15 to 25 units of insulin glargine in. He was someone who had okay long-term blood glucose management, but was struggling with fairly elevated morning glucoses. And without any real changes in nutrition, things started happening like tenfold the results that were happening prior. So, in the right case, it can be absolutely game changing for some people. It's probably not the game changer that most people think it is. I think a lot of people definitely attribute more to insulin than it probably should.
especially that's the
Um,
case what we're talking exactly what we're saying, where this person's a hard gainer who's already eating exceptionally well, who's already got a nutrition coach and training, and who's already brought their caloric intake up to 6,000 and not really being able to deal with that much food and all, or still at like 103 kilos. Like you want to push your weight up, like how do you push it up from there? Do you know what I mean? More food doesn't exactly do the job sometimes. Like
yeah.
if you're not being able to utilize the food how you need to be.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just what you eat, it's what you eat and assimilate. If you're not digesting and storing and utilizing the food you're eating, it doesn't matter that it's going in your mouth.
Yeah.
You're not doing anything with it.
Yep.
All right, so we move on to aspart, which is your most common form of rapid. Typically, this is one that's going to be used around large bolus meals or around training. Generally, more so around training is when I'm bringing it in. Um, the pre-training dose is probably the most. Look, bit hesitant on this. It's probably the most effective time to be dosing the insulin aspart. It's also probably, well, it is the most dangerous time to be dosing it as well because you've got obviously unstable blood sugars from training itself.
Yeah. So
You're
just
not
to
home typically.
probably
Yeah, you
to
go.
explain, no, but I was just going to say, probably to like just explain and give some back information there. Um, with a rapid, there's a high likelihood of going hypoglycemic, and training already can sometimes make people hypoglycemic as well. So if you're not this is like where we're saying you have to be a little bit respectful in terms of understanding if you're going to do something like this pre-training. Now, I've never used Rapid or like anything like that in terms of insulin, but I understand that if you're going to do that pre-training, you have to understand, and it depends on your training style too, right? Is also going to be a big factor, but you have to be respectful of making sure you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's and making sure you've got some sugar there with you and stuff like that if it does start to drop, right?
Yeah, and pre-training nutrition obviously becomes very important as well. Um, if you're using two types of insulin, you obviously need to, account for the fact that, especially if you're using a long and a slow, you now have two overlapping insulins. So you're not just taking the rapid by itself. There's also glargine in your system. And just to back up slightly on what you're saying with the hypoglycemia, so the reason with Lantus or glargine, for example, why the hypoglycemia risk is so low is even if you shoot 50, 60, 70, 100 units of Lantus, which I have done acutely personally, exactly right. You have a 24 to 36-hour half-life, even longer if it's the Toujeo form, and you're getting that entire dose over a very steady period of time. There is no spike, no peak, no trough. It's a constant, hence why it's called a basal insulin. Whereas with your rapids, with aspart, you get a very rapid pickup about 15 minutes in. You usually get a little bit of a drop off, and then you get another second spike, usually about 60 to 90 minutes in, where there's a fair risk of hypoglycemia
Important to
occurring a
remember
second
that
time.
60 to 90 minutes in the second spike, because I think that's also forgotten as well, right?
Mm.
That like post often for most people that post workout, post training sort of meal time.
Even if, look, where if I'm to ever get caught out, it's the 3 to 4 hours post. it's that, yeah, especially, and because look, especially when you start to push things, food gets really high. A lot of people are going to be doing pre and post.
Mhm.
Again, there is still that aspart. There's still some of that first aspart dose in your system when you dose post again. So you need to be careful about this. And if you're training later in the afternoon, like if you're finishing up at 8 o'clock in the gym, unless you're very advanced, I'm certainly not going to be suggesting that you go shooting post-workout insulin
And then
because,
go to bed.
yeah, it's not smart.
No.
So
Um,
yeah,
Pre-training doses. So you're taking that sort of like half an hour before training. What does that look like? Training, what does that dose look like if you are someone moderate to advanced?
typically with pre-training insulin, well, there's a few different ways I've used it, and I think there is nuance to the individual and the reason that it's being used. It's to the protocol as well. But the most common protocol I typically suggest and follow myself is almost immediately pre-training injection. So, I mean, if you can at the gym as you're walking in,
Yeah.
begin sipping on that intra-workout carbohydrate probably just before you do that injection, and then begin warming up and go about your training session as normal. Obviously, pre-training nutrition needs to be, according to whatever dose that you're about to use. Actually, let me back that up. The first big mistake with insulin is that people match their food to their insulin dose and not their insulin to their food intake. And that's how you get fat. The worst thing you could possibly do with insulin is decide that you want to take more insulin. So now you're going to eat more food so that you can take more insulin. Thermogenic still occurs. If you increase that surplus, you increase the insulin, you're just going to get fat. There's no added benefit to it. Insulin needs to fit your current diet. If your current diet requires insulin and insulin can fit in within your current diet setup, great. If it doesn't, insulin's probably not needed.
Yeah. It's a need to use basis, right? Not just I will.
Yeah. Yeah. I want good pumps.
Yeah. Cool. Super interesting.
Sorry.
Side
What one last little point,
oh,
my bad.
no.
With every other drug we take, we're pretty much aiming to get super physiological.
Mhm.
There is some degree with insulin where we are trying to get to semi-super physiological very temporarily to kind of change some of the other hormonal states of the body.
Yep.
But you can't ever really go super physiological with insulin because insulin is a continuously working hormone. It will always work. If there's insulin there, your blood glucose will drop. If
Yep.
your blood glucose drops too much, you die.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we probably like glazed over that when we said there's risk. Like it's death.
Yeah.
Like it's like going into like what you people may have heard is like insulin coma and not fucking waking up, like just sliding out. Like that's the
Yeah.
risk. I don't think but we probably glazed over that a little bit, but like that's what we're talking about in terms of like the risk of not being aware or self-aware or not timing carbohydrates well. Like there is a large or significant risk with insulin, and it's not unfounded in the sport, especially bodybuilding. Like there are people who have died using insulin because they fucked
Yeah.
it up.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously side effects, the one key one is going to be like hypoglycemia. Is that the acute side effect, right?
Yep.
And thing to look out for. When we look at like things or like levers to mitigate that, we're going to just look at making sure that you've got some like high GI, like sugar-based or like glucose-based cordial, lollies, things on hand that if you do start to drop, you can spike back your blood glucose. But obviously, your training or intra-training nutrition or general nutrition needs to be accommodating for that as well, right?
Yep. And if your intra-training nutrition doesn't sit properly in your stomach and you're prone to throwing up during workouts, that is a fucking huge risk. So that's something you do need to try out beforehand as well,
Yeah, super interesting.
because that gets dangerous.
Are there any acute, other besides the hypoglycemia and obviously the impending threat of death, is there any other like acute side effects that we should be concerned about?
Um, Look, one thing, it's not really something to be super concerned about, but one thing you will notice when you inject insulin is you usually get a solvent taste in your mouth quite quickly. It's usually metacresol, or a different type of solvent that they're using. That's nothing to be alarmed about. Um, On the acute side of insulin, yeah, not too much really to be concerned about other than the hypoglycemia. Chronic, there's definitely some considerations with insulin use, more so around insulin sensitivity than anything else.
Yeah, so that was my next one.
Um,
Okay. And this goes to HGH too. My big one was, hey Connor, I've thought about taking insulin HGH. I've been training for a long time. I want to use these things for performance enhancement, but I don't want to end up a diabetic.
yeah, I would say managing nutrition is probably the biggest thing there. Growth hormone certainly has risk of increasing diabetes. Insulin abuse certainly also has risk of increasing diabetes. But paired with the lifestyle that we generally should be living if we're living this kind of a lifestyle, I
Lifestyle.
really don't see it being a huge issue. Look, if you're getting into that kind of elite strongman stuff where body fat almost kind of has to get a little bit higher, or that elite super heavyweight powerlifting stuff, yes, there's going to be more risk involved there. But for most of your weight class based stuff where you guys are staying fairly lean, they're doing cardio, they're not eating in massive surpluses, I just don't see it being a huge issue. The lifestyle covers 90% of the potential causes or
Training,
concerns.
et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And
Uh,
carrying a lot of muscle. Like that is one of
yeah.
the biggest safeguards that you can have for good insulin sensitivity.
I don't think it would be remiss to say like being in the industry quite some time, like guys who've used growth hormone and insulin quite well, who do live the lifestyle though, who are carrying plenty of muscle, and you hear that they've become diabetic or something like that. Do you think that's more hereditary, or do you think that is impacted by their drug use, even if they are living the lifestyle? Do you think do you think it is unusual, or do you think it is predictable that that would be maybe come to pass?
Um, there's one that I know off the top of the head that you might be referring to, which was a type 1.5 diabetic
Okay.
from the industry. So that was in there, that was just going to happen.
Yeah.
They're effectively, don't have all the beta cells in the pancreas. So they still have some, they can produce some insulin, but they're eventually going to become insulin insufficient.
Yeah.
Um, I think there are definitely some people that probably just get the short end of the stick. And look, every drug has a potential risk.
Of course.
There's
Yeah. Yeah.
always
Yeah.
a chance you're going to
Yeah.
fuck yourself up.
Yeah.
It's not something I would say is typically a super high risk.
Yeah.
Um,
But there's a risk.
Always a risk.
But I think that's just like important to like we always think that we're not the one. Do you know what I mean? It's like I'm gonna slam 1,000 milligrams of Masteron, but you know what? My mom's dad's got all his hair, and I think I'll be fine. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's like, oh well, 3 years later I've got no hair.
that
It's
was me.
yeah. You always, it's just important. It's like, I'm just using that as like a reference point to be like, we always think we're not the one, but just remember
Yeah,
that, like, if you're going to play with fire, sometimes you get fucking burnt, bro. That's it.
yep,
That's what it is to it. And you own your decisions. We're all adults. Do you know what I mean? Like, if I fucking go do a bunch of ket and land in a fucking K hole, like it's no one else's fault.
yeah,
Like if you're an adult, you make decisions, you take responsibility for those decisions, I think.
yeah,
Um,
exactly right.
Parent hormones, parent peptides, sorry, parent peptides. Keep saying hormones. Growth hormone. Well, growth hormone, right? HGH. Talk to us about why athletes would use HGH to perform better.
All right. So many different reasons. A plethora of different uses. Obviously, just starting with the basics, obviously, lipolysis is going to be a minor advantage of growth hormone. So a little bit of increased fatty acid mobilization into the blood to be used as energy.
Yep. It means your fat's
Uh,
going to get used for energy, is what he's saying. Yeah.
yes, or at least
More so, a little
circulated.
bit more. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Um, Improved sleep is one that most people notice even at quite modest doses,
Yeah.
along with circadian rhythm benefits. Obviously, improved anabolism, predominantly coming from the increase in growth factor production at the liver.
Yeah.
Um, it acts as almost like a preparatory hormone for anabolism as well. It increases blood glucose levels, kind of allowing for fuel in the blood to be used as building blocks for substrates. Um, Yeah, there's just generalized recovery, improved tendon strength, connective tissue, and then obviously there's quite a few cosmetic benefits, hair, skin, nails, stuff like that on top of it as well.
Yeah, I feel like my fucking nails, man. Cut
I
more.
mean,
Not being
yeah,
I'll be like,
yeah, fucking
oh,
oath.
I just cut these motherfuckers,
Yeah.
Definitely one.
I mean,
Um,
even bloat, growth hormone can be quite water retentive, and there are even some cases where the bloat can be a direct benefit for some people,
yeah,
also a big drawback for some,
yes,
but
for sure. Just
occasionally.
weight class. I mean, do you sometimes take that out, coming close to like a weight cut for athletes if you find they are like retaining a bit of water there?
Yeah, with most of my strength guys, I pull it out.
Got a couple of weeks to go or something like that.
Yeah, depending on how they respond to it. Me personally, I can't run much growth during prep because I've got small hands and
Yeah,
grip's my issue. I mean, I
yeah,
fucking give up about 70 kilos on my deadlift to grip. So I can't deal
yeah.
with any fatter hands from a GH. But
So, and in saying that, right, like, so talking about like growth hormone and like we'll talk about some of the like acute-ish and chronic side effects. Um, the the swelling and the hand thing is an interesting one for athletes because you do get that water retention and you will find that like your hands might get stiffer, you might get like some carpal tunnel syndrome stuff, you might have that grip issue. So it's sort of weighing up when to use it. My main question there was most people say it's a drug that you should use all the time or a lot of the time, right? It's one of those ones where it's not like if you just throw it in for 12 weeks, you're going to see the benefit. Most people say you need to use it for a year, 2+ years to be able to really see the long-term benefit or effects of that. Do you think that's true?
no, I think you get benefits from it immediately. I think it's very naive. A drug starts working the second it goes in. Like the lipolytic advantages, for example, they're only acute. They only happen after injecting the drug. They're not something that are happening 12 months down the line.
Have you heard this
Having
before
said
though?
that,
Have
oh,
you heard?
definitely.
Yeah, people say it all the
And
time, like, oh, you've got to use it all year round, like you've got to use it forever, to get the benefits out of it.
and I think a lot of that comes, especially in Australia, from the fact that up until a couple of years ago, it was just financially unviable to run any more than like 4 or 5 units unless you were fucking loaded.
Yeah.
Like I remember when I first started looking at growth hormone like 8 years or so ago, it was like $1,600 for a 36 unit Humatrope pen. It's like I go through that in 3 days now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, so yeah, I mean, if you're going to run micro doses of growth hormone because that's all you can afford, it probably is going to take you 12 to 18 months before you
Yeah,
notice
sure.
anything. But now that you've actually got accessibility to doses that are in true performance enhancing ranges and not just kind of TRT plus,
Therapeutic, yeah.
you definitely notice improvements very quickly. Having said that, if you can afford it and you don't get the side effects from it, I think it is a drug that is best kind of left in play for most year around if it's if it's feasible for that person.
Acute side effects.
So carpal tunnel is probably going to be the biggest one. So two things with growth hormone that I find typically will find somebody's max tolerable dose is going to either be blood glucose management or carpal tunnel side effects. Typically ends up being, where they have to tap out for either one of those two reasons.
Yep.
And I would say carpal tunnel is probably the more common of the two top points for most people.
Yep.
The carpal tunnel is most likely caused due to some changes in the way sodium is filtered at the kidneys. Growth hormone increases sodium retention at the kidney, which kind of throws out a little bit of sodium potassium balance and can increase some fluid retention. Increasing dietary potassium is one way to manage this, and obviously lowering a little bit of your dietary sodium. Typically, now, when I first started coaching, my ranges for sodium were a lot higher. But as I've kind of worked with more heavier guys and more serious athletes, I've realized that sodium tolerance, especially on performance enhancing drugs, is quite variable and probably a bit lower than what I had initially kind of thought to be ideal. I typically find most people to be somewhere in that 2-to-1 potassium to sodium ratio to begin with.
Yep.
with potassium somewhere in that kind of 90 to 100 milligrams per kilogram. And then I will taper sodium up if needed from there, if the athlete's dealing with cramping or something of that nature that may suggest low sodium issues. But yeah, typically around about 2 to 1 potassium to sodium is where I think you should be aiming for generalized health, but for mitigating some of those growth hormone related side effects around the sodium retention, it's going to go a long way.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first thing you did with me, right? Which was
Yep.
increase potassium, increase food-based potassium, change the hard salt, manage sodium, and just probably some more micros and stuff in there just to manage it as well. But that was the first thing that was thrown in for me. And I noticed a pretty immediate difference, I think. And I also think that regardless, like I used to get a lot of cramping. Like I jump on the air bike for 5 minutes and my adductors would cramp afterwards. Like my
Yep.
general mineral intake was probably pretty poor in general until very recently. Um, yeah, interesting, super interesting. Chronic issues. Obviously the key ones here, or the key acute ones, will be that carpal tunnel syndrome. Sort of like it goes away as soon as you remove it. Do you know what I mean? Like just for
Yep.
FYI for people, like it'll go. You're not stuck there, but like it can be quite uncomfortable. Like for me, my threshold was pretty low, probably due to multiple factors, but like even just like a low dose, I'd start like getting like waking up in the night, like having that like fucking shake my arms out, quite intense and uncomfortable, almost like painful. Do you know what I mean? Sides, and they as soon as you drop it back to like your tolerable dose or pull it back or out completely, it will disappear. Um, and then obviously blood glucose will probably restabilize as well, but it's not something you want to be acutely out of whack with, you know. Um, Chronic issues. What are some of the chronic things we need to be aware of with chronic use of growth hormone?
Yeah, so blood glucose, obviously, and the same with acute. Obviously, you do have to be concerned about the acute blood glucoses to some degree, although acute elevations in blood glucose aren't really an issue. But if you're using growth hormone around the clock and that acute elevation is not really an acute elevation because you're getting 4 acute elevations during the day now, um, probably an issue. And I will say that I fucking very rarely suggest consuming growth hormone frequently like that. Maybe unless you're fasting, that would be about the only time.
Mhm.
Chronically, same deal. Long-term blood glucose management, again, generally pretty well managed by lifestyle and having a smart dosing protocol.
Mhm.
Probably don't want to be dosing big doses of GH around your last meal or around your heaviest meals.
Mhm.
And keeping some activity and cardio is also massive on that as well.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, potential electrolyte and aldosterone issues with some of that sodium and potassium manipulation. Um, Obviously, steroids also have an impact on the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, so you can get a little bit of a exacerbating effect when combining GH with anabolic steroids. Can lead to quite large amounts of water retention for some people. Periphery edema is one that you'll see fairly commonly, especially when people start to push doses up quite high. Um, Obviously, blood pressure becomes an issue when water retention starts to become high. Um, as far as blood pressure goes with growth hormone, typically, obviously, lifestyle interventions are always first. Your ARB and ACE inhibitors, which are typically your most common blood pressure medications used within the bodybuilding industry, just due to the impact that steroids have on the angiotensin renin-aldosterone system and their ability to effectively undo that initial impact. They will still be effective with growth hormone because growth hormone does impact aldosterone. Um, but I find that hydrochlorothiazide to be quite a helpful tool with growth hormone related water retention, blood pressure, and even the carpal tunnel issues. Because the mechanism of action of hydrochlorothiazide as a diuretic is a sodium and potassium depleting diuretic. So it increases the excretion of sodium at the kidney, again, effectively kind of null and voiding GH's impact on the increasing of
Yeah.
sodium retention of the kidney.
Leveling that out.
Um, and I find it to be quite beneficial for those that are either struggling a little bit with blood pressure or even just cosmetically from water retention. Sometimes if blood pressure is managed, you can still get a little bit of that kind of cosmetic, not so pretty bloat,
Yeah.
which the hydrochlorothiazide tends to take care of quite well. Is also a very effective blood pressure medication as well.
One of the biggest concerns that I hear from HGH is like obviously it's growth hormone and it has a relatively or like a as it has a systemic effect, right? So if you have some predisposed issues, likelihoods of cancer, etc., can be problematic.
Yeah, definitely. Would approach it with extreme caution if you have high risks of cancer or previous existing cases of cancer for sure. It's
Yeah.
not going to cause cancer, but if there is some there, it will exacerbate the speed. But so will pretty much all anabolic drugs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, so all anabolic drugs will likely increase this. The one thing to note is like if you have an issue or pre-existing issue that seems to be recurring or that would might be affected by growth hormone, for example, it would exacerbate or speed that up, right?
Yeah.
Um, great. I think that's like our parent hormones done. I think there's so much to go through. Let's
It's all good.
yeah, let's go through. I'm gonna have to timestamp these or something, I think. Let's go through our GH peptides. Now we've talked about insulin and growth hormone. Let's lump these together a little bit just to help with the speed of this and make sure someone's not sitting through a 4 hour lecture. Let's talk about as a whole, we've got CJC 1295, CJC 1295 with DAC, GHRP2 and GHRP6, correct? They will be the growth hormone releasing peptides, correct?
Yep. So that would, yeah, just growth hormone peptide. Well,
Oh,
two
yeah.
of them are growth hormone releasing
Two of
hormones,
them
two of them are
dumping.
growth hormone releasing
Yeah.
peptides.
So
Um,
can you talk to us? Let's talk about the CJCs. What's the difference between CJC with DAC and without DAC?
So they're effectively the exact same drug, but DAC stands for drug affinity complex, which is effectively, it's almost acts as like an ester does on a steroid, which extends the half-life of the drug. So CJC 1295 has like a 15 to 60-minute half-life, somewhere in that nature, as opposed to CJC 1295 with DAC, which is like 8 or 9 days half-life. Pros and cons to both.
Yep.
Uh, Growth hormone is typically a pulsatile hormone, so there are potential drawbacks to the constant bleeding effect of trying to increase growth hormone as opposed to sporadic bursts. But both are quite effective at doing what they're supposed to do.
So CJC is basically we're using that to hit the button for your body to upregulate its production of growth hormone. So we're not like synergistically putting it in, synthetically putting it in. So when we take growth hormone, we put the drug growth hormone into our body, right? When we take something like CJC, we're not putting that hormone into our body. We're not putting growth hormone into our body. But what we're doing is creating a signal for our body to upregulate and increase its own production of growth hormone. Would that be a fair way to explain that simply to people?
Yep. So CJC acts as a growth hormone releasing hormone, which is a precursing hormone which tells the pituitary that it needs to then produce more growth hormone. Um, The next class of drugs, which you typically are going to take alongside a GHRH, are going to be your growth hormone releasing peptides, which is again a precursing hormone which signals the pituitary to now dump all of the growth hormone that it has already produced.
Mhm.
So one's telling the pituitary to produce more, the other one's telling the pituitary to release it. So you get like a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of effect when you're stacking these things together. Um, Obviously, the one drawback to peptides are you're limited to whatever your pituitary can produce. There is always going to be that cap of whatever your natural system is capable of. Whereas with exogenous growth hormone, you pick a dose, you put the dose in, and
Obviously,
it happens.
everybody's circumstances are a little bit different, but most of what I've listened to have talked about these secreted dogs or like releasing hormones, etc., versus like HGH for the money that you're spending and the amount of like units of growth hormone produced or input into the body in growth hormones case. It seems to be very biased towards costs for impact being growth hormone, right? Just doing growth hormone. Is there a reason why you can see someone use these drugs as opposed to just using growth hormone?
Yeah, so as of kind of a few years ago, with kind of the Chinese situation making things a lot more readily available for everyone, I really don't see a massive application of the growth hormone releasing peptides anymore, just because, as you mentioned, financially, growth hormone is a lot more viable.
Mhm.
Um, the one main benefit that peptides and other growth hormone releasing analogs have over exogenous growth hormone is that we actually produce multiple forms, slightly different variations of growth hormone.
Mhm.
Obviously, exogenous growth hormone is just one of the variations of growth hormone we produce. It's responsible for the majority of the bodily functions that occur from growth hormone, but there are likely some small bits and pieces that are being missed by not having some of these other growth hormone Dalton variations within the bloodstream.
Mhm.
So in potential cases like injury healing, it may be worth having some peptides in the mix to get some of those other forms of growth hormone. Um, it is possible to even, and I've played around slightly with some of these protocols, can't say I notice huge differences, may do so in the future again, but kind of potentiating an exogenous growth hormone dose with a combination of some form of growth hormone releasing peptide or supplement, even something like MK677, so that you're still getting a small amount of those endogenous growth hormones being released, and then doing something like a bolus shot potentially of your exogenous growth hormone before bed, so that you're getting a little bit of both worlds. Again, it's
Interesting.
probably not like an exponential improvement, and you probably, I would guess, bang for your buck, you're probably still going to get more out of just taking more growth hormone.
Yeah.
But there's potential merit to that there for sure.
When we're looking at like these CJC peptides, uh, are our desired attributes and side effects similar to that of growth hormone? Like when we go through these, realistically, what we're just trying to do is produce and release more growth hormone and get our body to signal to do so. Are there any other side effects that are different to that of taking growth hormone, or is there a risk minimization to growth hormone as well using the peptides?
I would say there's a small degree of risk minimization because you are still kind of limited to what the pituitary is able to produce. So there's kind of that negative feedback there that you're never really going to go crazy super physiological with production. Um, the growth hormone releasing peptides have a few different drugs within that class. They predominantly work via mimicking ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone.
Mhm.
So some of these GHRPs are used almost entirely as appetite drugs now.
Mhm.
Some people are just using them. They happen to be a growth hormone releasing drug, but they're purely taking them as an appetite stimulant. Something I've done personally in the past, GHRP6, GHRP2, MK677, all growth hormone releasing drugs that I have used purely as appetite stimulating measures. And that is, again, a very valid use for them. They can be quite effective for that. But for the most part, the desired outcomes are going to be the same as what you're looking for with growth hormone, just at probably a lower magnitude.
So we'll move to the releasing hormones, GHRP2, GHRP6, and MK677, which you just mentioned, because they are primarily within the industry used for as like an appetite stimulant now. Most of the time you'll see it because they will increase your appetite quite a lot. If you're using any other drugs that will decrease or suppress your appetite or anything else like that, sometimes it's a good way to be able to get the food in that you need to get in, right? People will
Yep.
find. Um, uh, is there anything worth speaking about here in terms of effects or side effects that would be outside of what we've already talked about?
Um, Not particularly. Um, Look, the MK677 doesn't really fit into the peptide group,
Yeah.
but that is another one similar to CJC 1295, which is going to cause more prolonged elevations in growth hormones. So
Mm.
the potential for blood glucose issues is going to be a lot higher.
We'll probably keep
Um,
MK677 for some of our like other ancillary. I just thought because you mentioned
yeah,
it,
yeah,
that we're sort of
yep,
bringing it up because it does release growth hormone, does increase the
yep,
appetite. Very similar signaling to like the GHRP sixes and twos, right?
yep. You do have
Just different
two newer
mechanisms.
classes of drug. Very, yeah, different mechanisms. They're both ghrelin mediated, but they're slightly different. You do have two other drugs within the GHRP class. Actually, more than that, but I'll do two that I'm more familiar with. You've got hexarelin and ipamorelin.
Yeah, so I've got hexarelin, ipamorelin here, and semirelin, which would be
And
similar, I think.
sermorelin as well.
Yeah, yeah,
I know less about sermorelin, but that is
yeah.
currently what the main prescription one. It's quite popular at the moment, but I'm not super well up to date on
So
sermorelin.
what's the difference? So if we sort of glance over semirelin, because ipamorelin is very popular, hexarelin may be less popular, but I hear a lot of athletes using ipamorelin, especially females. Do you want to talk about the differences or like why athletes would use ipamorelin or hexarelin?
So the main benefit of both of those two drugs over GHRP2 and 6 are they have very limited or no increase in appetite. So they're going to be much better suited to dieting phases or anyone who has already, sufficient appetite. Um, Hexarelin has some very unique impacts. I actually use both of these drugs with clients. Um, Hexarelin is able to have direct impacts, I believe, on the CD36 receptor in cardiovascular tissue, and has actually been shown to have positive cardiovascular impacts, which are completely independent of growth hormone.
And that's
Uh,
hexarelin.
Hexarelin, yep. So growth hormone does have pro-cardiovascular impacts at physiological or slightly physiological doses.
Mhm.
But the effects that hexarelin have, you get the benefits of the growth hormone, but there are completely independent growth hormone mediated
Mhm.
positive cardiovascular effects that occur directly through, I believe it is the CD36 receptor in cardiovascular tissue when taking hexarelin. Hexarelin is extremely potent. Dosing wise, the micrograms are going to be a lot lower. From a growth hormone releasing drug standpoint, you will desensitize to it a lot quicker. So the doses either need to be much, much smaller or the duration needs to be shorter. I haven't seen research that would suggest whether or not the positive cardiovascular impacts mediated by the CD36 receptor also downregulate, or if that is something that stays constant.
Mhm.
Um, but the growth hormone releasing impact of hexarelin is something that definitely seems to downregulate over time.
Um, cool. Very cool. So just to, because we're going to move forward, the basically, you've got these producing hormones, so upregulating the production of growth hormone, the releasing. Just to remind people, you would want to couple these. So you would want to use something like a CJC and a GHRP or a paramelanin or hexamelin together to get
Yep.
that 1 + 1 = 3 result out of these. But like we've said, if you're a performance athlete with a reasonable access to growth hormone that is going to be reasonably cost effective, then your output or production of growth hormone and to dollar ratio using these like secretagogues versus like something like growth hormone is probably going to steer you towards just using growth hormone.
Yep.
Cool.
Definitely.
Let's bounce to maybe in the same sort of realm. The IGF peptides. So
Yep.
IGF-1, IGFL-1, R3. Do you want to talk to us about these IGF peptides?
Yep. And I will just also, because it's be worth noting, so growth hormone and IGF-1 are in the same feedback loop. So IGF-1 has negative feedback on the pituitary to reduce growth hormone production, as growth hormone is the main driving factor of IGF-1 production at the liver. So if you are taking IGF-1 peptides and you're taking growth hormone releasing peptides, if you're taking the IGF-1 prior to injecting any of the growth hormone releasing peptides, you're going to be shutting off your endogenous production because the IGF-1 is already there providing that negative feedback to the pituitary saying we don't need to produce growth hormone. So you do need to be somewhat careful when you're stacking some of these growth hormone releasing drugs because you can interfere with your body's own kind of feedback loops with how it determines effectively how much it needs to
Yeah, that's what I
produce.
thought. Because we're gonna just for listeners as well. So we've talked about growth hormone and insulin. And we've talked about like these GH-based peptides. We're gonna talk about IGF, but then we're gonna go through specific outcome-based peptides, healing, nootropic, immune system. So I just want to kind of get these out of the way so we can move into some of these other kind of like more outcome specific peptides, I think, as well. So talk to us about IGF peptides, why we would use them, what they are. Obviously, they're working on the IGF system versus the growth hormone system, but it's on the same loop. Talk to us about the IGF peptides, why we would take them, and what impacts they're going to have on our training or performance.
Yep. So largely very similar to growth hormone in terms of the anabolism effects. As the name suggests, with IGF-1, it's an insulin-like growth factor, so it does have some insulin-like effects on blood glucose. It can cause a little bit of a lowering of blood glucose levels and improving of insulin sensitivity. Um, for the most part, I still think the IGF peptides fall back under it's probably just money better spent on growth hormone. I do see a little bit more use for IGF-1 within the female population, and it is one that I do use occasionally with females, especially ones that are maybe looking for something as like a bridge between androgen cycles.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, it's probably not going to be the first peptide most strength athletes are going to be going for. It
I
is, again, there you go.
No, I was just gonna say I've never really seen anyone prescribe much from this IGF-1 family. Do you know what I mean? There's probably a couple here that I see on lists that I get thrown at, you know what I mean? But not really super accessible either. I would say lesser used, lesser accessible. Less
Yeah.
accessible probably for the most part because there's less demand, right?
Yeah. And kind of return on investment
Yeah.
is modest at best. The IGF ones most people have access through peptide websites seem to be effective, but not anything groundbreaking. You do hear rumors about the legit Increlex and mesacarmin or whatever it is, which is the proper pharmaceutical grade pure IGF-1,
Mm.
being game changing.
Yeah, I've heard the
But
Inklix is
it's not.
like S tier fucking if you can get your hands on it, which seems like the holy grail.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
obviously, well, it's
Yeah.
something I'll probably never know, but
Yeah.
I have
Even like
little bit of there you go.
no, you go for it. Go. A little bit of experience.
I have a little bit of experience with IGF-DES and IGF-LR3. I do have half of mine to try a pretty high dose IGF-1 LR3 experiment sometime in the next 6 months or so, just because I'll probably take a little bit of break from strength-based stuff and
Ah,
just focus a little bit more on physique-based stuff. And that does have a little bit of a interest just to kind of see how that is in a higher dose, shorter period, just for curiosity. But yeah, for the most part, I think growth hormone is going to cover the majority of what people need. You get the added lipolytic benefit of the growth hormone. There is still fat loss. There's definitely fat loss that occurs from IGF-1. It's not through lipolysis, possibly through improved insulin sensitivity and glucose management. But you do definitely see some improvements in body composition.
mhm.
Um, it could be a use case in some people that maybe get excessive carpal tunnel from growth hormone, but don't get the side effect profile from the IGF. So that would probably be the biggest.
Key uses, key reasons.
Yeah.
So IGF-1, IGF L1R3, IGF 1 DES, differences, key differences when we're trying to decide which one we might use. Is there a reason why you might use one or the other?
All right. So the pretty much the only difference is half-life. Pure IGF-1 is minutes. Like you injected, it's like
Yeah.
something like 10-minute half-life. IGF-1 DES is like 30 minutes. And then your IGF-1 LR3 is, I don't know, it's could be anywhere from like 8 to 20. I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, but it's significantly longer.
Yeah.
Um, DES and LR3 are what most people are going to have access to. LR3 is probably the more potent of the two versions. Um, the legitimate Increlex is pure IGF-1 though. As we kind of mentioned, that's probably most likely the way to go if you've got access to it. Most people are never going to find that.
So I said, even I was going to say, even growth
I've
hormone,
never seen it.
just noting that even growth hormone, most of us are getting, or most athletes will be getting like non-pharma grade growth hormone, and I've heard
Definitely.
the differences between pharmaceutical grade hormone growth hormone and non-pharmaceutical grade growth hormone are huge. Big
Heard
difference.
varying things. Heard
Yeah.
varying things.
I guess it depends on the quality and stuff like that you're finding as well. So I find that super interesting because obviously, like your sources, who you get it from, a lot of those factors will make a big difference into like the quality of like peptide or drug that you're using as well. So
Just a quick shameless plug as well, as far as sources and stuff. I will be in Melbourne at the Melbourne Fitness Expo. Not this
here's my
weekend, next
prima.
weekend with Ped Test Australia. And if
Yeah.
you want to come and chat to us about some of the testing results and the quality of performance enhancing drugs in Australia, we'll be there talking about the kind of stuff we're
Even
working on.
even grabbing some ped tests too, like while you're here and you're having to pay shipping, like test your stuff. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
for sure.
Really important. I'll put that in the post as well. Um, just a little reminder. Cool. More potent of the two versions, IGF-1 3, MGF and PEG MGF. So in the same family here. Reasons why you would go MGF or PEG MGF over these IGF based peptides.
Tried them when I was young. Gonna keep it short and sweet. I just wouldn't use them.
Great. Perfect. Love that. Let's probably bottom line this. I'm a strong more powerlifter. Am I going to use these IGF-1 peptides?
Probably not.
Nah, great. Thanks. Let's move on. I think that's like perfect, right? Like I could probably see more use for like these GHR based peptides, like or like GHP based peptides, whatever, but maybe less so the IGF ones. But like let's be real, like at this point in time, like you're just going to use growth hormone. If you
Yep.
get to this point,
Look,
you're going to use
if you're
peptides.
a serious athlete, you're using
Yeah,
growth hormone.
there's just like I just don't think there's too much there. Now I'm going to start with the what is considered the holy grail in strongman and powerlifting because it is the most used peptide in our sport, the most requested peptide in our sport. That is the healing peptides, TB500, BPC157, and the lesser known GHKCU. Could you please talk to us about and help us understand a little bit more about BPC157, TB500, and GHK, please?
Yep. All right. We've already done a little bit on BPC and TB, so I won't go too long on those. BPC 157 is a peptide derived from human gastric juices. It increases angiogenesis, the formation of blood vessels, potentiates growth hormone, particularly within tendons, but most likely in other cells and tissues as well. It is very good for GI health and gut lining, reduces inflammation. List goes on. It's a pretty generalized drug. It's quite beneficial for quite a large range of different health ailments. TB500 is somewhat similar, also increases angiogenesis. I believe TB500 has a little bit more cell migration that occurs when taking it. There is some cardiovascular protective effects of TB500 as well, also anti-inflammatory. Um, GHKCU, which would be the kind of the lesser known of the three, very popular within, I mean, to the men listening to this, I'm sure if you go and ask your wives or girlfriends about copper peptides and GHKCU, they'll probably know what you're talking about from their skincare products. So they're quite heavily used in the health and wellness and beauty industry. Very strong driver on collagen synthesis, like very, very strong to the point where you actually notice at injection sites, like site collagen forming. For example, I was doing a lot of site injections with GHKCU, BPC, and TB500 in my left shoulder for the labrum tear and cartilage tear. And I had it scraped multiple times because you could just like run your hand across it. It was like I don't know, it was like a golf ball. It was just bubbly and it's just full of just collagen deposits from that kind of localized increase in collagen from the GHK.
Super interesting. Sorry for someone who gets a lot of tendon or tissue issues, someone who has lots of tears. GHK is definitely one to consider, right? Like if you're finding
Honestly, it could be a year-round one. It's cost
yeah.
effective. Fuck, I'm not scared to admit it, but I notice a big improvement in my skin as well. I deal with some psoriasis flare-ups occasionally, and GHKCU definitely seems to improve my skin a little bit.
So girlfriends dipping into it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
As I said, I honestly I think a lot of guys, significant others here, probably already have a little bit of an idea about copper peptides from their skincare
Yeah.
routines, and it is one that can actually be used transdermally as well. So.
Yeah.
I think injectably is probably the way to go for injury-based issues, but I have used transdermal for skin tightening protocols, for example, because of its increase in collagen production.
Mm.
There is some potential for, if you've had a client that's lost a fairly decent amount of weight and is probably not at the point where they 100% need skin removal
Yeah.
surgery, but they have some loose skin, something like GHK copper in combination with, growth hormones or even BPC TB500 stuff that's going to increase collagen production and regeneration can actually have a fairly noticeable improvement on skin elasticity as well.
There you have it, boys. Hide your GHK in the fridge. Make sure you pump. They have it.
And your growth hormone.
Yeah, yeah, your growth hormone for sure. Yeah, I've heard people's partners use growth hormone as like a sleep aid and like a skin hair and the skin nail and hair aid as well. Very popular, like at very low doses. Do you know what I mean? Like, but
Yep.
definitely. Now,
2 to 3 I use a day for females will
yeah.
do wonders on that side.
Yeah. TB500, BPC, and GHK. Are we putting them or re-injecting them locally into the injury site or a particular muscle, or are we just doing them subcutaneously? TB500 generally recognized having a more systemic effect. BPC 157 having maybe a more acute effect to a localized area. And GHK systemic as well. I would probably assume, but are you also talking about very acute, localized production of collagen? Does it matter? I mean, we could probably put all like subcutaneously. We could probably put them all intramuscularly. What's your preference here? Do you have a preference? What's your recommendation?
Uh, they'll work either way. I think you definitely get a little bit more, especially with the GHK from site-specific injections. Obviously, as I mentioned with the GHK, you do definitely get a noticeable increase in collagen at the area. So you can probably get. My concern with subcutaneous injection with GHK is more cosmetic and getting a thickening of the skin where you're injecting. So it's probably not an issue for most people, but it may be a hindrance to seeing definition and stuff like that if you're more of a physique-based person. So I tend to go intramuscular for that reason. And just due to the noticeable improvements in collagen synthesis at the site of injection, I just can't see how injecting it closer can't be having at least some benefit.
Mhm.
But realistically, 90% of the benefit is going to come from just getting it into the system in the first place.
Um, TB500, BPC 157, GHK, year round as therapeutic doses. TB500, what would your recommendation be as a therapeutic use or peptide?
Interesting. I'm still a little bit out on BPC and TB500 year around.
Mm.
I'm starting to move there a little bit more myself, especially post this injury I've been on for quite some time. It's not something I really run with clients yet, though I'm getting less concerned with that prospect moving forward, as there's more
What was your
information and
concern?
more so the same kind of concerns around growth hormone,
Yeah.
just kind of really heavily pushing that pathway chronically all the time,
Yeah.
and obviously potential for disruptive cell to multiply, anything
Yeah.
cancerous, anything of that nature. Um, I think realistically, with a lot of the other risks that have been partaken, it's probably not something to be concerned about, but I wouldn't hang my hat 100% on that either.
Let's say not quite therapeutically year round, but let's say I've got a 12-week prep coming up and I would like to run TB 500 BPC during my prep, right? As a recovery aid. What would someone put in their uh, preparation regime to help their recovery or any issue that might arise front-ended?
I like around 1,000 mics BPC a day split into two injections. A lot of the preparations these days are available as either BPC TB500 blends. You can even get BPC TB500 and GHK blends now.
Yeah.
If that's the case, just inject all three of them twice a day.
Yeah.
TB500 could probably get away with every other day if you're buying them separately. Probably about a milligram and a half every other day would be fine. I tend to personally just do 1,000 mics BPC, 1,000 mics TB because that's how mine comes in a one-to-one blend in a BPC TB 500 bottle.
Mhm.
And then GHK between 5 and 10 milligrams a day. I typically like to split that into 2 shots as well. GHK, I have no hesitations on suggesting as a year-round therapeutic agent.
Would a female also be using that 5 to 10 milligrams per day?
They could do. GHK can be painful, I will say, especially depending on the concentration that it's at. So start low just to give yourself a little bit of a warning to it. But even 2 milligrams, even 1 milligram a day for females, you start to see benefit as well. So
Acute. Connor, I just competed or I've got a competition in 4 weeks. I've torn my bicep, I've torn my hamstring, I've torn my fucking quad. I've done something of acute, very painful disrepair. Um, I'm going to go get some peptides. What do I run to get myself to competition or help myself get to competition?
all right, well, I would be starting with I'm 50-50 on the giving it a day or two to let the natural inflammatory
Yeah,
responses take
this is something that
place.
I also tell people, like give it a couple days till your natural inflammatory response dampens and then add it. Do you think yay or nay? I'm curious.
I'm 50-50 because there's definitely good literature that suggests that the inflammatory response is a required part of healing for sure. No,
Mhm.
no questioning that. I don't know how much the I don't know how much the reduction in inflammation through the mechanisms that the inflammation is reduced from the BPC and TB500 actually matters because it's not like a non-steroidal and anti-inflammatory drug where it's just like fully dampening the inflammatory signal. It's more of an immune-based response. So I just don't know
Yeah.
if
Interesting.
you're
That's fine.
hindering yourself in that first
Yeah.
day or two.
Mm.
There's definitely good reason for both. But regardless, so either the day of the injury or maybe 2 or 3 days post, depending on which route you want to take, I would go a large bolus. I mean, honestly, something like 5,000 of TB, 5,000 of BPC in injection could be done. GHK, you could go a pretty decent bolus there as well. Probably look at splitting those injections up because it will be painful if you're going to do any more than 20-ish.
I've
Like,
only
fuck.
I've had my first experiences with this and I'm not really taking too much, but like I definitely like was like, oh, that's a little bit like spicy. The day like put my belt on yesterday and I was like just in that body fat section, I was like, fuck,
Yeah.
that's a little bit like uncomfortable to be honest.
Man, I made a fucking big mistake one night. I had like, there was like 10 milligrams left in a bottle and I was just doing 5 milligram shots. I was like, fuck it. It was just, I'm not drawing that up again. I'll
Yeah.
just do the 10. And it was a patella tendon shot.
Yeah.
I put 10 in my patella tendon. I didn't sleep that night.
Yeah.
It was brutal. It was so bad. Rough. Never again. I haven't done that since.
Fucking so rough. Have you tried Pedersen for your knees?
I have, yeah, heaps.
Yeah, yeah,
I really like Pedersen. I
yeah.
used shitload of Pedersen for the last prep and a little bit for the shoulder.
Yeah, interesting. We'll go through. We'll have a whole section on horse medication maybe later in the
Yeah.
podcast.
Actually, Pedersen's one that'll be a very good one to talk about in
Yeah,
future
yeah, yeah,
episodes. I think there's a lot of application for that.
yeah. And so GHK, we've got an acute bolus dose. We've just been injured. Like you're splitting up maybe like 5 or 10 milligrams, or what's your recommendation there?
Look, honestly, if you were like nothing mattered other than getting to the comp and you just needed to,
Mm.
like, you just didn't really care, you could put, honestly, you could probably still get away with like 100 milligrams of GHK as a bolus. You wouldn't want to do that very often. Your main issue is copper toxicity. That's the issue with with GHK in your upper end of dosing is
Yeah.
because it is a portion of the drug is copper. It's GHK copper peptide, and if you're mega dosing it, you can get to the point where copper intake gets too high. You start throwing out zinc intake, and then you start having micronutrient deficiencies and copper toxicity. Um, but yeah, if you just like let's say you're a week out from fucking world's strongest man, you're already flown over there, and you've just got to pull out the fucking Hail Mary to try and get yourself to the
Yeah.
comp. You could certainly run a protocol like that if needed.
I mean, important to remind people as well, if you do take these if you've got an injury and you do take these bolus doses, and I have succumbed to this also, it's like, I mean, like, I know that, like, I would tell clients, give it a couple days and start, but like, I've torn my hamstring and come home and just fucking like, yep, straight to the fridge.
Yep,
Here's fucking 5 milligrams of BPC. Here's
that's my approach
three
as well.
milligrams of TB 500. I'll go through a vial every day for the next 5 days, and then I'll probably go through a vial every second day. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yep,
if you're like, I would say so, like 5,000 micrograms is 5 mils, right? So, like, that's like a BPC vial. I would say that I actually tell clients like more is actually more with BPC. Like,
yep,
you can just fucking take more, and more is going to be better. So if you've got the means to, like, I just had a client who ruptured his patellar tendon, so his kneecap was up
oof,
his fucking quad. He's had it reattached and stuff
fuck,
like that. He's got some TB 500 and some BPC. He's got 30 mils of TB 500 and 50 mils worth of BPC 5. I said, bro, like, for the first 4 weeks, like, for the first week, 5 mil, like, go through the fucking top five and then spread the next five over. You know what I mean?
yep,
Back to a normal dosage or something like that. But you can just more is more. If you had 4 weeks to competition, like, so 5,000 milligram bolus doses, I would say maybe like you could continue that for like 5 days or something. What would you say? What would
yeah,
you?
definitely.
Yeah, and then
Honestly, for the most part, until your funds say that you can't, I
yeah, and
don't
then
see a huge amount of drawback on it.
after that, let's say you've done 5 days, so you've gone through, or like, let's say it's 2 weeks and you're taking 5,000 micrograms a day of all these, or like, let's say for argument's sake, 3 micrograms or 3,000 micrograms of TB 500. Like, yours might come in 3 milligram things, so you kind of 5 3. After that, would you say just like spreading out at like 1,000 micrograms a day or something like that, or would you just try to keep it a little bit higher and say like 2,000, as high as feasible, right, for the 4 weeks?
As high as feasible, pretty
Yeah,
much. Yep. Yep. I would say my bottom end dosing, if you're really trying to push things, would be 1,000 mics of BPC, and I would still be splitting that
yeah.
AM PM.
Side effects. So things that we would want to be concerned of, or things we want to be aware of using these peptides.
Really just kind of uh, unwanted cell proliferation.
Yep.
There's really no other major side effects I don't think of off the top of my head. Post-injection pain with the GHK. And then obviously the copper toxicity potentially if you absolutely abuse the shit out of it, but it is very difficult to do that. Like, there was a big thing on the internet with people talking about copper toxicity through GHK, but in order to get to the copper toxicity ranges, you'd have to be consuming like 30 milligrams a day on end for stupid periods of time. It's just not really feasible for most people.
Um, Love it. That's probably I mean, that's the combination that probably we all want in our back pocket. Do you know what I mean? Like, knowing that information, knowing if I get an injury or acute injury, what should I be taking? It's like, well, more is more. Do you know what I mean? Like, as much as your fucking wallet allows you, it will make a difference. What I was going to say is I've succumbed to this as well, is the immediate effects of those drugs is they have a great anti-inflammatory response, which means that you can feel a lot better. You can
Yeah.
feel like you're okay. You are not okay yet. So, like,
Yeah.
just be mindful that, like, just because you feel okay to train and you're like, oh fuck, that tear's healed really quickly, in the same amount of time, the integrity of the injury site will be better compared to a natural healing time. But immediately post injury, it doesn't heal that fucking quick, but you will feel
Yeah.
better a lot quicker. So just be mindful
Definitely.
of fucking overdo it just because they've got great anti-inflammatory responses, right? I think that's the biggest mistake that, like, myself and others have made.
Definitely.
It's like, I fucking
Definitely.
heck, and I'm benching 2 weeks later. It's like, yeah, great, but like, it's not healed yet. Don't
Yeah.
overcook it. Like, the same recovery times are ideally adhered to, right?
For sure. And the
Uh,
same recovery protocols. It's another thing I see a lot
yeah,
of people, they turn to drugs and they're like, yeah, I'm on BPC. What's your rehab protocol? Oh, the BPC.
yeah,
No,
yeah, bro. I'm
no.
squatting 300 on Monday. I'm doing my leg day. It's like,
Yeah.
okay. Um, one that I'm super interested in, obviously, any high functioning, busy individual like yourself, like myself, running businesses, dealing with clients. Um, and this is something that I'm super excited to get into some of this stuff. I always say I'm excited because I find it interesting. But the nootropic family and also the nootropic family outside of the peptide family. So the stuff that has hit the world and hit the bodybuilding world, it always takes a bit longer to filter through to the other parts of the fitness industry. I feel like strength people are always like the last people to know about things like, your methylene blue, mod C. I mean, Max is doing a great job of making that sort of stuff a
Yeah.
more like known in the strongman world. And
Yeah. We'll give a shout out to Max because methylene blue's just blown up. Max has been using that for a long period of time. But
Yeah, it
Max,
has.
Max
So
is
like
who
that
I got that off.
combination, yeah, that combination. It's like I know Max cops a bit of flack for some of the posts that he puts up within like the strength community and the strongman community because there's a bit of tall poppy syndrome there. But like sometimes if you're advocating for a supplement before it catches popularity, like yeah, sometimes it might be hit and miss, but like methylene blue is one of those ones where it is absolutely fucking gone like just haywire in the fitness industry, especially the bodybuilding industry, preps and stuff like that. And that specific combination between that like methylene blue, MOT C, SLUP 332. You know what I mean? Like those that combination is like it's on every fucking podcast. Everyone's fucking talking about it, right? And he was probably one of those early advocates for it. But we're going to talk about nootropic peptides today. Uh, Solank, C-Max, and cerebral lysin.
Yep. Yep. All right. There's a big class to go over, and we'll probably touch on a little bit more in depth when we kind of look specifically in nootropics. There's
Yeah.
a few things I haven't touched up on quite some time with this area, but it's a very interesting class of drugs and drugs I use frequently. More so for cognitive side of things, but they definitely have performance benefits as well. Samax is both Samax and actually, but all Samax, Salank, and cerebral are all Russian-derived drugs. Samax I believe its main use is for strokes, but it is a cognitive enhancer is the main kind of underground use for it. Salank is also cognitive enhancement, but is more on the anxiolytic side of things, so anti-anxiety. It works off mimicking a hormone called tufsin, I believe, which is like a stress hormone, which almost preempts the body like it's about to deal with a stressful situation, which kind of helps you deal with the anxiety side of things. A little bit more complex of a mechanism. It's something I'd have to go over to kind of talk
Would you use
in
that
depth
Solank
with.
peptide if you do have anxiety? Is it got use or like reasonable use for that?
Yep, I like Slank. I use Slank with clients as well.
Yep. Interesting.
Um, Definitely helps with anxiety, but also has some focus and cognitive aspect to it
Cool.
as well, and stacks nicely with other peptides or other cognitive enhancements. Like for example, right now I'm on 500 micrograms Slank and 150 milligrams of armodafinil this morning. Modafinil I love. Armodafinil is occasionally hit and miss for me. Sometimes it's rocket fuel, sometimes it's too much. Um, Slank definitely can help take the edge off some of these stimulants.
Like if a
Same
stimulant
with
gets you
same
a
with
little bit like
L-theanine.
anxious, like, well, I don't use modafinil, but if I have like two coffees, sometimes I get a little bit shaky, like I
Yeah,
get like a little anxious. So something like that can take the edge off that kind of like higher stim sort of thing.
especially if you're underslept, where you
Yep.
like I don't know, sometimes when you're like really underslept and you start getting
Hitting that fucking button. Yeah.
exactly the caffeine button.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely have their play. I like to rotate this, and again, this is more from a productive standpoint than necessarily performance
Yeah, of
enhancing,
course.
but
Yeah.
I rotate through a bunch of different nootropics. I try not to use the same things day after day just to keep them. I like to use nootropics frequently, so I just try not to make them repetitive. Um,
Cerebral lysin.
so this one is derived from peak brain uh, nerve factors, or
Another one
uh,
that Max has talked quite a lot about.
yep, yep. Quite interesting, quite hard to access. Probably one that most people don't have a huge amount of access to. One thing that all three of these drugs have in common, which are probably the biggest benefits for strength-based athletes, is their ability to kind of ameliorate some of that central nervous system related fatigue. You definitely feel like you can deal with a little bit more just general load um, before you kind of hit your breaking point. So during a kind of a heavy, high demanding CNS peaking fatigue, I definitely see some of these drugs being either potential for direct training performance, or the other thing that I'm sure, I mean, I'm sure you probably notice it. I notice it, when you're prepping, cognition starts to drop off, and that can become one of the biggest issues with prep, is because you've still got to fucking work. You've still got to make money. Like as much
Yeah.
as it would be great to just be a full-time professional athlete and not give a shit about anything else, it's not the actual case. And if you can't work because you've just destroyed yourself in a big leg session, and these drugs can help you, come out post leg session and get back into your workflow and actually be able to be cognitive, so that you can get all your work done, get to sleep, and get a fucking decent sleep that night, then there's definitely going to be some big performance enhancing benefits there.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, yeah, I mean, like it's nice to think that you can do it all. And I used to talk about seasons where it's like I know that my business is going to take a hit if I'm doing preps. Like I
Yep.
can't like my check-ins that take 7 hours might take me fucking 9 hours to get through. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm just not fucking on it like I can be.
Yep.
I mean, so if you can find a way to get a little bit more consistency with that through those preps, then obviously, like it is important to be able to do the things that you need to be doing as well as the thing that you want to be doing for your sport as well. I mean, I always say before I was a dad, it was nice. Like I could do a lower body day or like a big events day and go home and watch a fucking movie and order a pizza and chill out and be a fucking strong man. You know what I mean? Like I was young and whatever else, probably in
Yep.
that fucking same boat sort of now, which is great. But like now it's like, well, I've got to try and get my work done in a reasonable time to get home to make sure I can do bedtime, bath time, dinner time. Do you know what I mean? Like help out around the house, get ready for bed, and then get my fucking shit ready for the next day. It's like there's no, like you've got to be able to get the work done in the fucking time. Otherwise, you run out of time, you know?
Yep. For sure.
Side effects of Solanc C-Max and cerebral icin.
Um, Look, all injectable products, so obviously slight risk of injection issues there. Cerebral icin is typically used in very high volumes, so it may be a little bit of a mental block with some people. However, it is one of the most comfortable injections I've ever done in my life. And when I mean high volumes, I mean it's not uncommon to talk about 5+ milliliter injections of cerebral icin at a time. I think from memory, the last big shot I did was 5 milliliters. You just don't even feel it. It's quite interesting. It's, for whatever reason, it is extremely comfortable to inject.
It just dissolves or like smokes pretty easily too. Like no,
It's a water base. It usually
yeah,
comes
yeah,
in ampules. Obviously, you can get some underground preparations, but the majority of cerebral icin you'll have access to should be from Russia in the proper ampules.
yeah,
So the quality side of things is probably at one portion there as well.
yeah.
Um, Samax, Selank's semi-stimulatory. Samax definitely has a mild stimulant effect. So obviously just being somewhat cautious around sleep. Um, Other than that, I can't really think of any major side effects that are worth noting.
Key dosages, Solanc.
250 to 1,000 micrograms, most people being in the 250 to 500 microgram range if we're talking about subcutaneous injections. Solanc is also very bioavailable via intranasal sprays,
Oh, yeah,
and even
I have.
potentially has, yeah. So um, the half-life of the Solanc seems to be reduced quite significantly when used intranasally. The dosing is fairly similar, but you're likely to have to dose multiple times throughout the day. Samax is pretty much the exact same deal. Most people are going to be in the 250 to 500 microgram range for Samax. Me personally, I use Samax fairly infrequently. I don't get as big of a cognitive benefit from it as other people. But I find if I use around about the 2000 microgram range, I get quite a strong cognitive benefit from it. So it's one I use a little bit less frequently, but typically at a slightly higher dose, just because my response from a cognitive standpoint doesn't seem to be as strong as some of the other nootropics that I tend to rotate through.
Hmm. And cerebral icing, you sort of said like one, that's going to be like 5 mil upward, like three.
Yeah, yeah, the dosing protocols on that are wildly varying. That has lots of different applications from athletes to ADHD withdrawal to drug dependence issues. There's
Yeah.
lots of different applications there.
That ticks off nootropics. Let's get into maybe lesser used in performance sports, but definitely for like weight cutting athletes, especially if you're cutting a lot of weight, or weight management for weight class athletes. We've got our appetite suppressant peptides, which have become incredibly popular also. You've got your retroglutide, semaglutide, and tirzepatide.
Yes, very popular. All currently wide illegal. So
They're all wide illegal currently.
look, technically retatrutide's not because it's not a scheduled or government approved drug yet.
Mm.
So technically in the fine print they can get you for that, but I don't believe there's any testing that's occurring for it.
Yep.
Semaglutide, tirzepatide are still both fine. I think one of them may have been added to the watch list this year, but it's not officially on the banned list. Um, Obviously potent appetite suppressants, they work predominantly via slowing gastric emptying. Semaglutide is, there are older versions of these drugs, but as far as general population is concerned, semaglutide is kind of the original flagship of this kind of range. Semaglutide is based off pure GLP-1 or glucagon-like peptide. It is the strongest of the appetite suppressants milligram for milligram because it is pure GLP-1. The second most common drug would be tirzepatide, which is GLP-1 and glucagon independent polypeptide 1. So it's a dual hormone action. Slightly more effective overall for weight loss, slightly less effective milligram for milligram for appetite suppression, as the GLP tends to be a little bit more potent in terms of the gastric emptying, slowing, and appetite suppression that occurs. And then you have retatrutide, which is a triple hormone agonist. It is a glucagon agonist on top of the glucagon-like peptide and GIP, the glucose insulinogenic polypeptide, or whatever the final one is. Retatrutide is still in clinical trials. So far, it has significantly outperformed the other two. Um, the other two drugs predominantly just act around appetite suppression for their mechanisms of action, whereas the glucagon agonism of retatrutide actually has some metabolic stimulating effects as well. Retatrutide also has some potential for decreasing things like visceral fat and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's generally quite very effective class of drugs. And one of the things that I am most happy about is the fact that they have proven calorie deficits work again, because it is very funny when you, especially with clients, it's like, I promise I'm sticking to the diet. I promise I haven't varied. It's okay, well, we're not losing any weight. Let's throw an appetite suppressant in, which has no impact on anything other than what goes in your mouth, and see if this same diet works. Wow, the same diet works now. Probably weren't eating the diet before because there is nothing going on right now other than your appetite's less. So, or
Yeah.
yeah, or even the the body positive crowd where it's I can't lose weight, can't do a calorie deficit, this can't do a calorie deficit that. I take Ozempic, now I've just lost all the weight. So where was this calorie deficit not working? Because the calorie deficit clearly works.
Calorie deficit works. Putting food in your mouth definitely doesn't work.
Exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah. So it obviously makes a big difference for people trying to lose weight in terms of like managing their appetite. There's lots of arguments, and there's lots of old school arguments. You got these arguments in like the bodybuilding world and stuff where it's like, well, it's not doing the thing. Do you know what I mean? Like it's cheating. You're supposed to suffer and stuff like that through it. And then there's the argument of like, well, it's the tool. and it allows you to do it. Like, I mean, fuck, if you're gonna take every other drug under the sun, like now, like this is
Yeah.
cheap. It's
We're
ridiculous.
exactly
Like,
right.
I
Fucking
just
retarded.
it's so fucking funny that argument. Have you heard this argument? Like, it
Oh,
just
for sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
it fucking blows my mind that cunts take. I don't know, I'm saying it on YouTube, but
Yeah.
motherfuckers,
Fucking go
yeah,
for it.
yeah, be like being like, oh well, like suppressing your appetite like that and having something that makes the dieting and the cutting phase so easy is just cheating these youngsters. It's like, bro, you take every fucking other drug under the sun. Are you
Yeah.
serious?
Yeah, exactly.
Call
Yeah.
a spade, motherfucker. Yeah, it just blows my fucking
No,
mind.
I completely agree.
Um, cool. So super interesting class of drugs, right? Now there's argument like there are people who inherently do have trouble losing weight, have trouble with their appetite, have inherently legitimately greater appetites, and then there's just some of us that are weak.
Yep.
I put myself in the second category.
No,
You
I
know,
love my food too.
I fucking love food, you know? So if it, like dieting is sometimes challenging because I just like fucking food, and if there's something that could help me not love food or not feel like I want to reach for the thing that I shouldn't be reaching for, then you know what? Like there's some definite benefits there. Obviously ours is primarily cosmetic. Or weight class based, obviously, but for lots of people in that camp, it's like it's health. If you can decrease your
Yep.
visceral fat, decrease your adipose tissue, decrease your body, decrease your risk of comorbidities. Like that's all fucking positives to me, baby. You know,
Yep. Regardless of what anyone says, I think this class of drugs in general will have the largest impact on public health out of any class of drugs so far,
which I
purely
mean,
just from
it
attacking
would,
the obesity epidemic.
yeah, it'll be great if we could all be like, whoa, eat less and move more. Do you know what I mean? Like, but the health industry's been banging on that forever. And guess what? Opposing us is um, marketing and advertising companies for food that are well fucking stocked with plenty of money and plenty of persuasion and influence. You know, that's not going anywhere. Do you know what I mean? Like our message is not going to do the fucking job or move the needle. Do you know what I mean? So hopefully this does. Side effects, besides like obviously we've got some positive side effects on, well, our desired attributes or desired impacts are a decrease in appetite. A decrease in appetite. We've got like the metabolic stimulation with the RET, decreased visceral fat. Obviously, the other two are primarily appetite suppressants. Other side effects of these, what will people look out for?
So the most common side effect is going to be a unwanted slowing of gastric emptying. So this is the main mechanism in which these drugs work in the first place. But there semi-frequently becomes cases where the slowing of gastric emptying is excessive and you get GI disruption and effectively stalling of bowel movements, severe constipation, which can cause issues.
Yeah.
Um, some people more prone to this than others. Obviously, lifestyle and dietary choices has a big impact there as well,
Yeah.
which again, in our demographic, generally not as big of an issue. If you've already got a good diet and you're just adding this to a solid program already, it shouldn't
Yeah.
be a problem. If you're eating like an asshole and you continue eating like an asshole, just slightly less, then probably expect that you're going to have an asshole digestion as well. So,
Yeah.
um, that would be the biggest and most common side effect. There is some increases in potential risks of pancreatitis occurring. So you would want to avoid alcohol. You typically, or at least largely avoid alcohol when you're on these kind of drugs. And probably worth doing some, at least a little, like maybe some lipase. I would at least test a lipase marker prior to commencing as well, just to ensure there's no elevation or anything going there with lipase, which is an indicator of pancreatic function. Um, that would be the main two. Obviously, there is also improvements in glucose management, which is generally a positive side effect.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, that would be kind of the main issues. Well, yeah, the main issues.
Nausea, just like the on the low end. Do you know what I mean? Like direct, like
Nausea, definitely, especially as you would find the correct dose.
yeah,
Can you excuse me for 2 seconds? I'll just go chuck a piss super quickly.
yeah. I should be able to. Hold on, I'll stop. I'll go. And we're back. I was watching you
All
drink
right.
coffee before, and I was like, I wouldn't mind some cold caffeinated caffeine, you know? Uh,
I'm living off the caffeine at the moment.
yeah,
Way
well,
too much.
yeah, yeah. Um, Well, where are we? We were just talking about retroglucose or the nausea in terms of like figuring out dosages and stuff like that. That's probably one of the not chill, but like we're talking about like some significant side effects, but just like day-to-day stuff, you might notice a bit of nausea and stuff like that when trying.
Reflux as well is another one that's
Yeah.
pretty
Yeah.
pretty common. And another one we occasionally get, I've heard some comments from clients, possibly some potential for some certain GI dysbiosis as well. I've had certain clients, and even at one period myself noticed like a sulfury kind of fermenting odor that can occur.
Yeah.
Which I assume is yeah, probably something microbiome related or potentially just due to the very slow transit time through the GI.
Yeah, interesting.
Um, but yeah.
Not concerning, but not something
Um,
or something that you would be like, oh, hey, that's weird, flagging it.
I mean, my burps stunk for a few days, which was concerning, but yeah, it kind of went away. And the other clients that I've had, it's usually been a temporary
Yeah.
thing, usually around the start or at a dose increment.
Ret dosages.
There is very large variation in individual dosing with retatrutide. Talking, fuck, I've seen up to like 15 milligrams per week being used.
Mhm.
Um, Doses as low as 1 milligram per week are also effective in some people. So it's typically I would suggest most people start with daily microdosing at 250 micrograms, maybe 300 if you're already fairly deep in a dieting phase and appetite is ravaging.
Mhm.
So 1.75 to 2.1 milligrams per week is where I would start. It has roughly a 9-day half-life, so I would give yourself kind of 9 to 10 days at that dose. It'll take 2-ish weeks to get to a steady state. Obviously, the dose will slowly build up in your system. If after about 2-ish weeks you're still not happy with the level of appetite suppression, add another 50 to 100 micrograms a day. Continue until you get to a level where you're happy with the appetite suppression. And it is probably something that will have to slowly increase the longer the diet goes. There does tend to be a little bit of a kind of dropping off in sensitivity to the drug as you use it longer.
One interesting thing that I've heard, I haven't used, but heard, a rebound impact on hunger. So coming off, because you don't use it all the time, correct? It's a period of time while dieting. We might use this as performance athletes. A rebound in hunger after using.
Yep, definitely. I think that comes down to the way that it's used, though. In fact, I would even almost go to say, especially in physique-based guys, the post-diet period is the most beneficial point for the appetite suppressants because a lot of athletes are completely capable of being 100% on their diet until the goal's achieved. And then once that goal's achieved, that's where they fall off.
Yeah.
So you get people, it's fine. They'll get to their competition, no worries. Don't have to fucking worry about a thing.
Yeah.
The day after their competition's done, that's when the damage can start.
Yeah. So it's
In
like
those
almost use it like,
cases,
yeah. Yeah.
damage control. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's like use it for the last 6 weeks where it's really hard, but use it for the next 6 weeks while they're like, well,
exactly.
I've foregone all this stuff for so long. Now I'm eating it, but I'm managing the amount that I can eat because my appetite's not as high. I'm suppressing that a little bit and then ease it off after that 6 weeks. And then you kind of swing.
I would never drop retatrutide post diet. It would always be something I would drop, partially into the next phase of the
Yeah.
dieting, and generally as a tapering off.
Yeah. I think
With
that,
all of these drugs in the class, not just retatrutide, any of these drugs being used would be used in that fashion.
yeah, it's super interesting. Semaglutide, similar dosages, same. Strongest milligram for milligram. Would we use less in that case?
Yeah, significantly lower doses with semaglutide. I typically still suggest retatrutide for most people just because it is overall more effective. But due to the semaglutide still has a little bit of application because it is a very potent appetite suppressant. Some people use a combination of the two. Um, Half to 2.5 milligrams of semaglutide is about your normal weekly dose. And I still believe it's best practice to be splitting that up into at least 3 times a week, but probably daily.
Tirzepatide, similar deal. Would you be really prescribing either of these now that retatrutide's here?
Not really, no. I would pretty much always choose Retta, and then if someone is particularly bad with appetite, I may add a small dose of semaglutide on top of the Retta, but
Well, not really.
generally not.
Cool. Let's charge forward to the last of the class, which is a super interesting one. One that I didn't even know was a thing. One that I wish I would have known was a thing probably 2 years ago when I had our son, because sickness plagues me. I think it's a combination of, I work quite a lot, I train quite hard. I don't get adequate sleep because I've got a toddler. So like you end up being a little bit suppressed all the time, and your immune system probably takes a little bit of a fucking hit. And then you send your child off to daycare at 12 months or 14 months, and then it just all starts. So
Yep.
I felt like I was sick for a year, I reckon. So we've got immune system modulators. Super interesting, great application for older adults as well. Like you were saying, you tell your parents to keep this in the fridge, but really good for, I mean, athletes coming into like sick, like flu seasons and stuff like that, with comps coming up. Super, super interesting. Talk to us about immune system modulators. We've got thymosin, alpha one, thymolene, and eptilon.
Yep. All right. So thymosin and thymolin, or thymosin alpha 1 and thymolin, are fairly similar. They're both drugs to do with the thymus gland. Thymosin alpha 1 is the one that I'm typically going to recommend. I don't have a ton of personal experience with thymolin, but you
Cool.
can be used for similar.
Let's just talk about that then.
Yep. So to keep it kind of simple, effectively what the drug is doing is it is upregulating your immune response, increasing T cell production, um, effectively just helping your body have a more robust response to any kind of uh, thing that your immune system's flagging as an issue. So you're effectively just driving up your immune system into kind of overdrive. Uh, Very effective with multiple different forms of colds. COVID is one that actually has had a fair bit of research with thymosin alpha 1, specifically around long COVID.
Mhm.
Um, Quite a few different dosing protocols depending on the way it's being used. It can be used either as like a insurance protocol kind of thing at the back end of a prep at a lower dose as like just try and avoid getting sick. It can also be used as a after the fact kind of thing. I've gotten sick. Now I need to try and get rid of this as quickly as possible. Typically, you're going to use a little bit of a higher dose in that situation. But yeah, a peptide that I think is one that is worth having in the fridge for most people that have, especially in your situation where you've got a toddler running around the house, having a bottle sitting in the fridge is pretty good practice. It's generally what I tend to do.
It's not
And yeah,
something you use all the time, though, right? It's something that you use
no,
acutely, either around potentially getting sick, being run down, understanding that you're a little bit run down and at a high susceptibility, or at the once you get sick, to try and recover faster from it and recover better. Kind of like the BPC TB 500. I'm assuming, obviously, because I haven't heard much, but I'm assuming it's very similar in terms of it'll speed up the recovery. In terms of the recovery time still will need to be there, but you'll get a lot better a lot quicker.
yeah, definitely. So thymosin alpha 1, obviously you might have picked up from the name, is actually another thymosin variant, just like the TB 500 or your thymosin beta 500.
Yeah, super, super interesting. I mean, a really good application. You know what? I always get sick when I come back from overseas competitions. Like your body
Yeah,
kind of holds on it as sort of like that you don't get sick in that prep. Your body's like holding on, running on like fucking adrenaline, or like it's under a lot of CNS fatigue and stuff. And then you kind of like get on the plane, jump on a plane with 200 other people with like recycled air. And I always get sick when I come back. Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like you relax, you're like, oh fuck, that comp's done, and then I always get sick. And then the other one was Epitolon. Epitolon.
Yeah, so a little bit different this one. I'm actually a big fan of this. I think this is probably going to be something that it's been around for a while, but I think it'll be used more frequently moving forward in the industry. So this is, again, it's another Russian drug. Um, the main uses of epithalon in the medical, well, sort of the regenerative health industry is around telomere lengthening. So telomeres are a portion of DNA which it's effectively a strand on the cell. When you run out of length of telomere, the cell can no longer replicate itself. So as your telomeres get shorter, obviously your ability to replicate cells gets worse, and that's effectively how we start to die and age. Um, Epitalon has a lot of interlinks with the pineal gland. It is very good for resetting melatonin production and sleep schedules. It's something that I've personally noticed a large difference in sleep scores when using, and an ongoing thing. So this is typically something you'd run like once or twice a year. And I tend to notice like a pretty noticeable increase in sleep metrics for a solid few months post. There are there's studies showing pretty profound improvements in cardiovascular function in certain individuals as well. Another big thing I like Epitalon for is actually as part of the healing stack as well. Obviously, when we're kind of driving the growth hormone pathway, the BPCs, the TBs, all that kind of stuff, you're increasing cell replication. So you would presume you're also kind of putting downwards pressure on these telomeres because of the rapid increase in cell replication. So to me, it makes sense to use something like an Epitalon or even like a taurine or the Astragalus route as far as over-the-counter supplements. Both potentially have telomere lengthening advantages as well. Just to kind of offset some of that rapid cell replication that's occurring from the other drugs that we're using to kind of push rapid cell regeneration. So yeah, I think it's a nice little add-on to that stack that I think a lot of people don't really think about from that point of view. But obviously, if you're continuously driving cell replication, you're going to be continuously shortening these telomeres.
Mm.
Same goes for if you're using growth hormone or anything of that nature. So I think it's probably a peptide that would be worth running once or twice a year for most people. It's not super cheap, but in our demographic, where again, we're driving these cascades purposely, it's probably a good idea to safeguard yourself a little bit against some of that telomere shortening.
Super interesting. Any negative side effects that people will be conscious of with using?
pH is, I believe, slightly lower than human kind of subcutaneous pH, so it is a little bit painful to inject. Other than that, that's all I'm really aware of.
And in terms of like dosages, so you're saying 1 to 2 times a year, how long would you run it for those periods of time over the year, and how much would you generally run?
So my preferred dosing protocol is 5 milligrams a day for 20 days every 6 months. The other common protocol is 10 milligrams a day for 10 days every 6 months. Um, Either of the two should be fine. I tend to go with the 20-day protocol myself, but I imagine 10-day will be just fine.
Interesting. So 10 for 10.
Yeah. So typically you're looking at an entire box. They normally come in 10 milligram vials there. So it's usually about a 600-ish dollar outlay depending on your source. But obviously it's twice a year kind of thing. Yeah.
Very interesting. Are there any other things that you wanted to, or that you think would be useful to go through today in this peptide overview, or does that pretty much cover most of those key ones that we're looking at?
There's one more in this class called LL37 or human cathelicidin peptide, which is effectively just a generalized antimicrobial. Um, Obviously, there's immune benefits there with certain colds and sicknesses.
Mm.
I am not going to give any definitives on this or publicly comment just yet because I haven't got enough information on it to give a full statement. But I've just finished using a combination of methylene blue, LL37, and then a short period of a combination oral antibiotic as like a microbiome reset. I have had ongoing issues with inflammatory bowel and
Yeah.
GI issues for the last 5 or 6 years. And it's just a little bit of an experimental protocol that I've run recently that I've just finished wrapping up the kind of eradication side of the protocol, of which LL37 was a portion of that. And now I've moved into kind of a repopulating portion of the protocol with a couple of high-end probiotics from Pendulum, and then just a bunch of fermented dietary sources, fiber and whatnot, just to see if we can. I'm not super hopeful on it because I don't think it's I'm not guessing that it's a microbiome issue predominantly, but at this point, my GI tract is the one thing I have a hard time staying on top of. So it's something I'm willing to give a try and see if we can get improvement on. And BPC is also another portion of this protocol as well to kind of just help with the gut line.
Yeah, I hear this a lot too as well, using it for this.
Actually, KPV, another anti-inflammatory peptide, I find very useful for GI issues as well, especially inflammatory GI issues, especially with acute flare-ups, just getting on top of side effects.
Yeah.
It's something I've had in for different periods at different lengths. Obviously, it just gets expensive taking everything all the time, but yeah, it's one I have played around with, and there's definitely some positive benefits for GI inflammation there.
And obviously, we chat because our audiences are going to primarily be performance based, whether it's like physique based. I know you've got a lot of physique guys, but you also got a lot of like strength based athletes as well. And obviously, mine are going to be predominantly like strength based athletes. But it's important to note that like strength based athletes are still people, and like in general, like the population, like these GI issues, other issues like the like stuff we're talking about with immune system or nootropics, like these peptides have such broad applications, even if it's not for strength performance, but you are a strength athlete listening to this and you need to upregulate your work flow. Do you know what I mean? Like I'll see that, or like you do have some GI issues. It's like, well, maybe you're not taking BPC 157 for anything other than like your intestinal tract. You know what I mean? Like help with some gut lining issues or something like that. Like there's other applications for all these that can be super beneficial depending on what your target is or what's important to you in your life. But these specific peptides have such a great broad application and pretty low barrier for the most part too. Do you know what I mean? Like we can see like relatively low side effects or like negative based side effects, relatively high efficacious use in terms of like impacting the desired outcome as well. So I think that's they're pretty cool to look into.
Definitely. Yeah, I think some of the stuff we've got coming up in the future episodes are also going to be very, very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for tuning in. If you made it this far, congratulations. You should know a hell of a lot more about peptides than you did when you started the video or started the podcast. Thanks for joining. Next month, we will be going through some ancillary, I guess, supplements. I guess you'll call them supplements, maybe drugs, ancillary uses, ancillary products that may benefit your performance. But that is our peptide episode. So we're slowly working our way through a giant fucking list of things that you may want to use. Now, remember, you can find Connor. Connor, what's your handle there?
Walsh Strength and Nutrition on Instagram.
And you can find that you can follow the links to go get a consult, to go get your blood work looked at, or I know he's quite full and quite busy, but he does do nutrition as well. So definitely a resource that I would be checking out or getting onto the wait list for if you're listening to this and going like, fuck, there's a lot to learn, a lot to know. Having someone to guide you through some of this like peptide stuff, anabolic stuff, if you're getting into this world, can be a great way to not make the fuck ups that some of us have made previously, right?
Definitely.
Connor's also going to be at the Ped Test Australia booth in Melbourne next week, and he'll be on the Strongman Say podcast as well. So we'll look forward to that. He'll be coming down, which is fantastic.
Cannot wait to get a session and can't wait to see the gym.
I think that's everything. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you in a month's time or next time.